Hello and welcome to this episode of the Halflings Armoury, where we discuss historical weapons. And today we're going to be doing something slightly different. I'm aware it's been a little while since I last did one of these, so we're actually going to be covering a couple of different weapons. Because today we're not just looking at a single weapon, we're going to be covering an entire group of weapons, specifically those used by the Aztecs. If this is content that you enjoy, please let me know in the comments and I can talk about other cultures and societies' weapons, and make sure you're subscribed for more in the future. So without further ado, let's get started. But this wouldn't be a bearded halfling video without a couple of caveats. So I just want to make clear, when I say the Aztec Empire, I mean the various Nahuatl people from central Mexico in around the 15th and 16th century. These are the styles of weapons that they would have used. The term Aztec isn't quite historical, but most likely refers to the empire of the Triple Alliance, led by the Mexica from Tenochtitlan. Additionally, I've done my best with the pronunciations. I've looked up guides for how to pronounce things, so hopefully I've done some of these words justice, and I've not pronounced anything too badly, but I am English. My apologies, we're kind of bad at this. But yeah, hopefully I've done nothing too egregious. But anyway, let's begin. The first thing we need to understand about Aztec weaponry is that they didn't use metal. This is largely because they frankly didn't need to use metal, because they had something that they used for the weapons that was incredibly effective: obsidian. Now, if you're anything like me, you thought for far too long a period obsidian wasn't actually a real material, that it was just a fantasy thing like mithril or adamantine. I thought that for an embarrassingly large amount of time. But no, obsidian is a real material. It is a volcanic glass, usually black. And, fortunately for the Nahuatl people, very abundant in central Mexico. Now, you may be thinking glass is not necessarily the best material to make a weapon, but that's where you're wrong, because the Aztecs used obsidian in such a way that they used it for the blades of their weapons, and if ever it broke or got damaged, it could easily be replaced. And in fact, obsidian was sharper than a scalpel, and so these weapons were very, very deadly. And we're going to be starting off with the classic weapon used by the Aztec Empire, the macahuitl. Now, the macahuitl is sometimes described as a club, but I don't think that does this any justice whatsoever. This is a sword, right? And I will not hear any different. The base of the weapon is a wooden paddle with shards of obsidian lining its edges. The weight of the wood and the sharpness of the volcanic glass was a deadly combination. And the macahuitl came in multiple sizes, ranging from normal hand weapons to two-handed monsters. Additionally, many macahuitls were lavishly decorated. The wooden paddle center of the weapon would be carved and painted in beautiful patterns. Unfortunately, there are very few, if any, original macahuitls left, so we don't know exactly what they might or might not have looked like. Especially if you're playing a professional Aztec warrior, this might be something that distinguishes them from the rank and file. The next weapon I'm going to be talking about is the atlatl. This is a deceptively simple device that was used to throw darts or tlacotli over much further distances than just throwing them by hand. But more so than that, it massively increased the power of the throw. These were probably the most common ranged weapons used by Aztec warriors. These weapons were very strong, even capable of piercing shields at medium range. To me, they feel as iconic as the macahuitl, and I think if you are especially planning on being an Aztec warrior in a game or writing a story involving one, having a warrior armed with a macahuitl and an atlatl, it instantly gives those vibes of the warrior. In battle, it appears that the atlatl was used both by dedicated ranged troops who would march out in front of the army, as well as being used by the rank and file warriors, who would use their atlatls to launch darts at their enemies before engaging in melee combat. There is this quite popular myth on the internet that the Atlatl could pierce steel plate armor. Weirdly, this rumor seems to have started from the conquistadors saying this, but it has been disproven the Atlatl could not pierce conquistador plate armor. However, it is worth bearing in mind the majority of conquistadors did not wear steel plate, it was simply too expensive. Most instead wore padded armor or chainmail, and the Atlatl could deal with these no problem whatsoever. In fact, one conquistador, Garcilaso de la Vega, complained that the Atlatl could pass clear through a man. Yeah, this weapon was impressive. But this wouldn't be a bearded halfling video if I didn't talk at least a bit about polearms. And for the Aztecs, this was the Tepoztepili. This very much resembled what we would know in Europe as a spear or a halberd, a long wooden shaft, but on the end, instead of a regular head, it would have a slight triangular head, and you would have obsidian shards in the edges of that. I have seen some descriptions of this weapon describing it as a peasant's weapon, but to me this feels quite reductive. This feels like it has a lot of influence and bias from more Western interpretations of who used a spear, because we do have a lot of historical examples of nobles having this weapon. But in battle, it would have acted very much like the polearms of any other nation. When paired with a shield or a chimale, spearmen would form the base of your army, able to fight off most troops that came to try and defeat them. But far more than just a defensive tool, the sheer weight of these weapons could deal a lot of damage. And speaking of the shields, I want to talk a bit more about the chamale. The shield was used almost universally amongst frontline troops of the Aztec Empire. Although always circular, they often varied largely in material and design. Most were made from wood, with deer skins or cotton for an extra level of protection that would offer good safety against most enemy attacks, whether they be ranged or from melee. Although we don't have exact definitions of how Aztecs fought a lot of their battles, a lot of people have argued that the frontline troops fought in the same way that Greek hoplites might have been, with the overlapping round shield being able to protect them and the people next to them. As for designs, the Aztecs seem to like stylistic geometric designs on their shields, often also decorated with various feathers and ornamentation. As you can see from the images on the screen, these are some designs I have borrowed from various codexes. And I think we can all agree they look pretty cool. And finally, I want to discuss a final weapon on this list because the Atlatl isn't the only ranged weapon used by the Aztecs. The Aztecs did have bows, but far more common was a Tematlatl or the sling. Usually favoured by low-ranking warriors and normally comprised of dedicated missile troops, the sling itself was made from Morgri fibres, would be looped between two fingers and the release held between the thumb and finger, meaning you could spin it round and get some really good momentum before launching it at an enemy. Now, most commonly, Aztecs would collect round stones, usually from rivers, to use as ammunition. But the reason why I want to mention the Tematlatl in particular was something else the Aztecs did, where they would collect clay, form it into balls, and mix it with obsidian glass shards. This means when the bullet made contact with an enemy, it would explode, launching glass obsidian shards into the person. This apparently proved particularly effective against conquistadors, where the clay bullet would smash into the opponent's chest, sending glass shards into the exposed faces of the conquistadors. Now, there is obviously a lot more to Aztec warfare than just the weapons I've had time to mention today. I've barely had a chance to talk about their armors, but if this is popular, I might talk about their armors in addition. But there's so much more to talk about, and if you do want to learn more about the Aztecs, both their society, their culture, their warfare and weapons, and how to incorporate the Aztecs into your own D&D campaigns, because we're not going to talk about the official D&D content for Aztec-styled people, because no, then I have good news. I have a release that is currently on DriveThruRPG called A Fantasy Guide to the Aztec Empire, where if you want to write your own campaigns based in the Aztec world, or at least have people inspired by the Aztecs in a better way than what it is currently, then this is a great place to start. I go over weapons, armors, class ideas and inspiration for your world, my own unique Aztecs subclass, the Oath of the Warrior Paladin, guides on creating your own Aztec worlds, my own Aztec-inspired world for you to use as inspiration, and even some stat blocks for the dreaded tertios. If this seems your cup of tea, there is a link below that you can use. But that's about everything. But as always, I've been the Bearded Halfling, and thank you for listening.